Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this wonderful Monday afternoon. And the season of the NBA starts this week, and we already have some huge basketball news coming in before the season has even started, literally right before the season has even started. On, I believe, Friday or maybe Saturday, it was announced that Shams tweeted out that Karl-Anthony Towns has been traded to the New York Knicks. So that's going to be the first segment that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about the exchange between the Timberwolves and the Knicks, who was dealt away, who ends up staying on the team, and what it could mean for both teams going on into their respective seasons. And then in the second segment, we are going to sadly talk about Dikembe Mutombo, who tragically passed away earlier today. The news recently broke about how he passed away, so we're going to talk a little bit about that in the second segment. And then in the third segment, we are going to talk about the WNBA games that ended up happening on Sunday, again, during football games, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then in the fourth segment, we are going to be looking at the NCAA and college basketball and how they recently just announced when and where the tournament games, like the March Madness games, are going to be taking place, because they have several different venues. And we're just going to go ahead and look over that for all of you college basketball fans and all of you college fans out there. We also have a special fifth segment that's actually going to be pretty funny, and in my personal opinion, so it should brighten the mood a little bit, especially after talking about the tragic passing of Dikembe Mutombo. So that's going to be the fifth segment. If you guys are interested in what that will be, I reveal it at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned all the way until then. Before I begin, however, I do like to remind everybody that we do love to hear what you guys have to say during the show. Whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, something you've been dying to share, we are all ears. And if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend you using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or, it really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, then that's totally fine. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really helps. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the biggest news so far in the NBA before the season has even started. Karl-Anthony Towns was traded completely out of left field. Like, no one expected this trade to come in, especially since the Timberwolves ended up making it all the way to the NBA Western Conference Finals with Karl-Anthony Towns as their power forward / center. It was a very surprising move that nobody really expected to see. And a little bit more surprising on the Knicks side is exactly who they ended up giving up in this exchange. So the Knicks, the two valuable players that the Knicks ended up giving up in exchange for Karl-Anthony Towns were Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo. Now, Donte DiVincenzo was part of the same Villanova team that Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart have all been a part of. And seeing that we haven't even seen the Villanova Knicks, which was so hyped in the offseason, this came as a very surprising move from the Timberwolves and from the Knicks as well. They also ended up dealing a lot of other. They ended up dealing a first-round pick as well in exchange for Towns. So it was Julius Randle, Donte DiVincenzo, and a first-round pick in exchange for the Minnesota power forward Karl-Anthony Towns. And again, this is completely out of left field, but I do feel like the reason why this trade was put into place was to try and construct a roster that can match up rather well to the Boston Celtics and their roster, because having another guard like Donte DiVincenzo would affect their rotations, and as opposed to having a center, because now they actually have the Knicks, now that they have a center. It was a bit of a problem going into this season, and it was a little bit of a discussion on what they would do at the center position. But as of right now, I mean, it seems it seems like now they have their center situation sort of in check. And rumors have it that this isn't going to be the only deal that the Knicks do before the season started. There's also some rumors saying that there's a possibility that the Knicks could end up trying to make a deal with, I'd say, well, not really I'd say, but the reports are saying, the Ayton as a possible center that they could use in their rotation as well. And that's going to be pretty interesting. But as of right now, the Knicks starting lineup would most likely be Jalen Brunson, along with Josh Hart, along with Mikal Bridges, as well as OG Anunoby at the power forward, and then Karl-Anthony Towns at center. And that matchup really fits really well with the matchup against the Boston Celtics, because, you know, OG being the team's the best defender is going to be on Jason Tatum, and then Mikal Bridges, who is a pretty decent, actually not even a decent, a very solid defender, and as well as a very solid scorer, is going to be on Jaylen Brown, who's the second best player on the team. And that's really, like, the matchups, they work pretty well both ways, both against both for the Celtics and for the Knicks. It's really going to come down to which team is going to be the better team on the floor. And is this the question on who won this trade? I think it's a little bit too early to tell. Like, I'm not entirely sure we can really make that assumption and we can make that speculation right now. Like, that's something that we have to wait on, because I remember saying that the trade between the, let's say, the Timberwolves and the Jazz for Rudy Gobert, I thought that was a really bad trade, and it ended up working out rather well. Now, on the Knicks side, I don't really think they're going to miss Julius Randle all that much. I mean, Julius Randle, yes, he did bring some good to the Knicks, but he also brought his bad, primarily in the postseason, where he wasn't really as good of a postseason performer as he was a regular season performer. And his inconsistencies were the downfall of the Knicks, and at least in the series when he was playing. And I don't really know whether or not he will be a solid fit for the Timberwolves, but he does still provide the spacing, he does still provide the scoring that the Timberwolves really need, while at the same time not being as much of a defensive liability, and also being able to actually keep up with a lot of the power forwards that there are in this league, because that was a very big concern, putting Karl-Anthony Towns at the power forward paired up with Rudy Gobert. Yes, they would have the height, but Karl-Anthony Towns wouldn't really have the footwork and the speed to be able to guard the typical power forwards. And Pau Gasol's in the chat again. Pau Gasol's in the chat. Salute, bro. How's it going? And back to the conversation at hand, though. Is this a win for the Knicks, or is this a win for the Timberwolves? Now, I'm not entirely sure, because a lot of people, well, at the start, a lot of people were really not expecting this trade to come in for the Wolves. And so a lot of people didn't really like this trade coming in from the Wolves, because why would you trade away a key player to a team that ended up making the Western Conference Finals? Like, you just fell up a little bit short. There's no need to really trade him. However, there is a stat that I do want to bring up that might sway a lot of your opinions. So the Timberwolves, per 100 possessions, were 12.7 points worse when Karl-Anthony Towns was on the court this postseason. So really, like, he was a detriment to this team in the postseason, similar to how Julius Randle tends to be a detriment to the team in the postseason as well. And it's like you're sort of trading away a bad playoff player with a bad playoff player along with several other pieces. So it's hard to say right now whether or not that's going to affect either team and how it's going to affect the team, but I think it's just too early to tell. I definitely feel like this is one of those trades that we have to feel out, because these two players are very inconsistent. Both Julius Randle and Karl-Anthony Towns, they're both very, very inconsistent, especially in the postseason. And it's like you're sort of trading inconsistency with more inconsistency. And whether or not you're going to get that production in the playoffs is yet to be seen. So I'm not really I wouldn't say that this was a bad trade. I think this is a solid trade that could end up benefiting both teams. But who ends up winning the trade? that's a completely different question that I have to wait until the season starts and until the postseason concludes and I see enough what I have to see. Because during the postseason, Karl-Anthony Towns definitely isn't that competent of a postseason performer. There was this one instance where in his first postseason, he scored only 5 points in a playoff game. I don't really hold it that much to him because it was his first ever playoff series. But, I mean, he doesn't really win. And I'm like, his team would win, but it's not like he was a very key or important piece to the team. In fact, it's lucky whether or not he would actually make the team better. Like, there's chances that he would actually make the team worse at times. And the same thing applies with Julius Randle. Now, yes, the Knicks were still a winning team with Julius Randle, but they were also a winning team without Julius Randle. And they won just fine. Really, it was just the injuries to the main core of the team that affected them in the postseason, and it let them down when it mattered most. So we have to see how this season plays out, and we have to see how it's going to affect each of these teams in the postseason. Now, according to looking at this article, Austin Rivers, he was talking on a couple podcasts as well. Austin Rivers ended up explaining that Karl-Anthony Towns' quick decision-making and shooting ability can lead to smoother offensive plays for New York. And he pointed out that Randle tends to dribble a little bit too much, which can disrupt the flow of the game, which is something that is very noticeable in his game. And yes, Karl-Anthony Towns can create a shot himself, but he is considered one of the best big man three-point shooters for a reason. Arguably the best center at three-point shooting in the history of the NBA. I mean, he does shoot around 40% from three, and as a center, that's very valuable and very impressive because, you can space out the floor rather well. And Rivers also said that Karl is highly skilled, doesn't need the ball in his hands a lot. He's going to shoot or he's going to make a move right away. And he could bring sort of a lot of fluidity to this Knicks offense that we don't really see, especially when you have somebody like Randle who tries to dribble a little bit too much in isolation, as well as Jalen Brunson, who also likes to dribble a lot in isolation. Difference is Jalen Brunson takes highly efficient shots and makes those efficient shots compared to Randle. Now, for the Timberwolves, on the Timberwolves side, acquiring Julius Randle and sort of fitting that in with Rudy Gobert and Anthony Edwards, not entirely sure if they're going to make it as far as they would with the previous team that they had. Maybe they will, but they do have to get chemistry down. Chemistry is going to be a very key difference, I feel like, in this postseason. Because, yes, while the Knicks do have the matchups that they need for Boston has the team chemistry. They've already won the championship, and a majority of the team and a majority of the players on the team have already had experience playing with each other. And before I end off with the segment, Anthony Manzano in the chat is asking a question. Am I screwed? This is what he's saying. Am I screwed as a Miami Heat fan this season? Do I even make the playoffs? And yes, the Heat, every single year, they always have a chance of making the playoffs. They always go on they'll make the play-in tournament, that's for sure, because the Eastern Conference is incredibly top-heavy. Looking at, I'll just go ahead and explain that right here. So, looking at the Eastern Conference and their standings from last year, I'm going to pull that up right now. Obviously, I don't remember every single team's record from last season because that was a while ago, and I'm focusing on this season. So, looking at the team standings for the Eastern Conference last year, the Boston Celtics, the New York Knicks, the Bucks, and the Cavs, they all made the postseason. Those are the guaranteed teams that are going to make the postseason this year, along with the Pacers, who I feel are a great team, and the 76ers, which would respectively hold the 5 or the 6 seed, depending on how the season goes, this, that, and the other. That would mean that there is the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th seed still available. And since those seeds are still available, it means that you have a chance to make the playoffs by winning in the play-in. And the difference, the overall win percentage difference from all of these Eastern Conference teams was almost 10. The Miami Heat had a better, the 10th seed, the Atlanta Hawks, they were worse than the Miami Heat by 10 games. And the Chicago Bulls were worse than the Miami Heat by, quick math. I'm terrible at math, oh my lord. They were better than them by around, I'd say, 5 games. And actually, no, it's not 5. It's actually 7 games. Like, my math is awful today. But the difference, like, in wins, it's staggering when you go from 8th down to 9th. And realistically, there aren't going to be that many teams that are actually going to be competing for a postseason spot in the Eastern Conference. I mean, the Nets are rebuilding. The Raptors, I mean, they could, but like that would take a miracle in my opinion. Charlotte Hornets, again, could take a miracle. Wizards, Detroit, they're going to be down at the bottom again. And then you're left with the Hawks, which I'm not really entirely sold on the Hawks yet. And then the Bulls, who just traded away DeMar DeRozan and are still trying to figure out their issues with Zach LaVine. So far, the complete team, there's really no other complete team that could match up against the Miami Heat or any other team that would end up falling into the play-in. So I don't really think that, as a Miami Heat fan, you're screwed. You can definitely still make the postseason. But we spent a little bit too much time on this one segment, so now I'll go ahead and go into the next segment, and I'll acknowledge your comments as well, but I do want to go ahead and go into this short break first. I'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Before I start off with this unfortunate segment that I do have to go through, I do like to remind everybody that we do love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take or a burning question, something you've been dying to say, we are all ears. And if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then you can go ahead and use Super Chat, and you can click on the $sign below the chat box and send in your comments and or donations that way. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, that's totally fine. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is gsmcpodcast.net, and then you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really helps the show. Before I go into this tragic segment, however, I do like to acknowledge some of the comments in the chat, mainly from Manzano. And he mentions how the Heat had Milwaukee, Boston, and New York's number during this season as they just got injured, and claims that the Miami Heat were the most injured team in the playoffs, which I disagree with. I actually think that the Milwaukee Bucks were the most injured team in the playoffs because they ended up losing not just Giannis Antetokounmpo, but also Damian Lillard. And those are the two most important players on the team. And without them, the Milwaukee Bucks weren't going to win anything and weren't going to go that much farther in the postseason than they already did. And That's just my opinion. And he also said Orlando. I did mention Orlando. They did make the postseason, and they're most likely going to make the postseason once again. They're probably going to get better, especially considering how Franz Wagner played in the Olympics. But again, you still have play-in spots, and you still have a chance to sort of fight for the right to compete in the playoffs, which I have a feeling the Miami Heat are going to do. When they're under the most pressure, when they're the underdogs in a lot of situations, they tend to prevail. So I wouldn't put it past any of them, unless there is some off the court issues involving Jimmy Butler and the team. And considering how it's most likely that looking like Jimmy Butler's last season on the Miami Heat, that's really the only concern that I'd have. But we do have an unfortunate segment that we do have to cover. As I'm sure you guys know, Shams ended up tweeting out earlier today that Dikembe Mutombo tragically passed away due to brain cancer. Nobody knew that he had brain cancer, but then again, with a lot of these celebrities, their private life, they really like to keep it, private. And you can't really expect that every single athlete is going to have, a randy dandy life after their time in the NBA. And there's going to be a lot of things that they would want to keep a secret, and there's going to be a lot of things that they can keep a secret now with, and since the media isn't going to be constantly on them like they are in the NBA season. I mean, Chadwick Boseman, when he ended up tragically passing away, nobody knew that he had cancer, but yet he was still acting and still being the Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. And I mean, with all of those, it's sort of like this is something that's just completely out of the blue. And Dikembe Mutombo, throughout his career, he's arguably the best defensive center in the history of centers, right next to Ben Wallace. I have a tough time in picking between those two centers on who is the best defender and which one of them had the best defense at the time. And I mean, one of the key differences between Ben Wallace and Dikembe is that Dikembe sort of struggled against Shaq. However, Ben Wallace didn't really struggle against Shaq, but that is a different story in of itself. One of the more underrated things about Dikembe Mutombo's career that immediately comes to mind was how on the 76ers, even though he was still one of the older players on the roster, he still ended up winning Defensive Player of the Year. And a lot of people, they like to say that Allen Iverson was sort of the only fighting force on the team and the only legitimate player on the 76ers roster, since he did win the MVP in 2001 and led the team to the finals. However, that isn't really the case. There were still other great role players on the team that ended up helping him get there that far, Dikembe Mutombo being one of them. And he is a rather underrated center, one center that doesn't really get talked about all that much, especially now, because of the shift in what teams focus now and what fans also focus now with the games. Right now, the game and the way basketball is being played is a little bit more offensively minded, as opposed to when Dikembe played, where there was a lot more emphasis on defense and being able to, play defense very, very efficiently. He had a very long career as well. His career was from 1991 all the way up to 2009. Played until he was 42 years old in the NBA. And as I said, his career stats and his career averages in terms of points production aren't really all that and aren't really that impressive. The highest points he scored in a season was average in a season, was 13.8 points per game. Actually, 16.6 points per game, and that was as a rookie. He also became an all-star player as a rookie for Denver, but his most popular and his most iconic moments were his time with Atlanta and the defense that he brought to Atlanta. And I mean, on Denver, he did end up averaging 4.5 blocks. Somehow, however, was only third in Defensive Player of the Year award rankings, but he did end up winning Defensive Player of the Year back-to-back directly after that season of averaging 4.5 blocks, despite not even averaging 4.5 blocks anymore afterwards. But he was a very, very talented rim protector, arguably the best rim protector, and he played his role very well. He did exactly what he needed to do, and unfortunately he could not end his career with a championship, which is the only real stain on his legacy. But aside from that, he was a phenomenal defender, one of the best defenders of the time. And it's tragic to see that him, alongside other legends like Bill Walton and Kobe Bryant and Bill Russell, end up passing away in this recently. And I mean, Kobe's, it happened a couple of years back, and so did Bill Russell, but still, it's really sad to see these guys go. And Manzano's in the chat. He has some comments. He says, I think the reason why people don't give enough respect to Mutombo is he's one-dimensional and he couldn't score. He was only a blocker, and that's why people mainly focus on Allen Iverson. Yes, I understand that, but you need those one-dimensional players that are really good at that one thing, because that could bring your team tremendous value. I mean, look at Rudy Gobert. I mean, you say that he's also one-dimensional, yet his team is constantly ranked number 1 defensively. So despite the fact that he's one-dimensional, he does bring value to the team, and it is a crucial factor to the Timberwolves in winning, and also the Jazz in winning. It just cannot get done in the postseason because teams end up figuring out a way to exploit that. Meanwhile, on the offensive end, there's no real way that any of these kinds of defensive players can provide. It's down to the rest of the players to provide on the offensive side of the ball. And I understand the point of being one-dimensional, but he was very, very good at the defense that he played. So that can't be undervalued, and that can't be underestimated more than it should be. But yeah, that is a very interesting comment that you said, and I do agree with you on that. And Manzano also says, I'm not saying that he doesn't bring value to the team, but when you're so good at one thing and your team relies on versatility, what can you offer? That's why you have so many other players on the team to offer that versatility. It's that's why it's a team sport. You have to have you have to have the role players, and you have to have those valuable role players in order to finally get you over the top. And that's sort of how the cookie crumbles. But that's all that I really have to say about this segment. I don't really want to dwell on it any more than I have to, because Dikembe is arguably the best defensive center in the history of defensive centers. And that's a great way to go out, in my opinion. But again, it's really tragic that it had to happen so randomly like this. But aside from that, we are going to go ahead and go into the third segment, where we shift our focus to the WNBA and their playoff games that took place yesterday on Sunday, again at the same time during football games. So you're going to hear me rant about that again in the third segment. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be looking at the WNBA playoff games that happened over this weekend. And before I do that, I do want to acknowledge Manzano in the chat once again. He added another comment saying, I always have spirited conversations with people. They say basketball is the only sport that you can rely on one player to make a difference. It's not like baseball, hockey, or football. And no, that's not really how basketball works. Like all of those sports and every sport, it's a team sport for a reason. You need competent team players in order to actually succeed. I mean, you cannot just rely on one player, because if you just rely on one player, that just makes it easier for the other team to come up with defensive assignments and come up with really bad situations for that one player. And if your one player is getting locked up, then there goes your entire offense. Now, the question is, do you guys by any chance have an NHL podcast? That's a very good question, and I don't think we do yet. I'm sure that will be coming soon. So I'm actually going to, speaking of which, now that you mention it, I'm going to go and talk. I'm going to send a text to my boss and ask him about that exact question. So give me 1 second. Because I'm pretty sure, I do remember that we did have an NHL show host. However, I'm not entirely sure if he's still the host of NHL or if we're getting a new one. So that I'll keep you posted on that one. But we're going to go ahead and go into the third segment, which is going to be talking about the WNBA playoffs. The games ended up happening on Sunday. Again, the same time as Sunday football. I said this before, I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying this until they change it. Change the schedules of these games, because having WNBA games at the same time as football is hurting the WNBA's ratings in the postseason. Not to mention the fact that Caitlin Clark has already been eliminated from the postseason, so already people aren't going to really want to tune into the WNBA anymore. And the fact that these games are happening at the same time as NFL football, more chances that they're not going to go ahead and tune into this game. It's really, really, really not the best idea to have these games held on Sunday or at any time when there's football going around. And it baffles me. It really, really baffles me. And hold on just 1 second. There we go. It's like, I just don't understand, like, why are we having these games at the same time as football? And spoilers, I didn't watch these games. I didn't watch the entirety of these games. I watched little bits and pieces when there was commercial with football going around, but still, I tuned into a lot more football than I did to these WNBA games. And really, it's just like, this is a problem, because like, it really is a problem. And Manzano's in the chat, you watch both the NBA and WNBA playoffs. Which one do you feel is constantly more entertaining, where you don't know who's going to win the championship, where the teams are so even? It's definitely the NBA, because the WNBA is way more top-heavy, because there are fewer teams in the WNBA than there are in the NBA. And since there are fewer teams, and since there are really like fewer impact players on said teams, there's a lot more that can happen in the NBA playoffs than there can in the WNBA playoffs. Not to mention, the NBA playoffs, regardless of what round you're in, is a 7-game series. The WNBA playoffs, however, the first round is just a best of 3, and then the next rounds beyond that are a best of 5. So that means there are fewer games for the WNBA to be played, and if there are fewer games to be played, that means there's less likely of a chance that something magical or some crazy comeback or like some crazy underdog team can end up advancing into the next round. Because, like, put this in perspective. So let's say like the losing team, like the team with the lower seed in the WNBA, loses in game 1. That means that they have way more pressure on them in the next game to steal that game in order to have a chance for their season to continue. That pressure could affect them in that game. In the NBA, however, if you lose in game 1, no big deal, because you still have another game that you can play and try to steal, and if you lose that game, again, it's not that big of a deal. You have the 2 other home games where you have the potential to tie the series in there and then make the series competitive again by possibly even stealing the next game in game 5. So like, there's more opportunities for teams to steal games in the NBA postseason than there are in the WNBA postseason. And as a result of that, there's also more chances for upsets to happen. Granted, that's most likely, it doesn't really happen that often, but when it does, it happens way more in the NBA than it does in the WNBA, because the WNBA is incredibly top-heavy. Like, in the first round of the postseason, every single team swept in a victory, And it was clear cut that the higher seeded teams were the better teams against the lower seeded teams. Like, it was clear as day. And Manzano's still in the chat saying, this is the idiocy of the commissioner for the WNBA doing this instead of having your season, start at the end of the football season after the Super Bowl and finish in June or July. No, I can't really agree with that either, because that's when the NBA season goes on. And there aren't going to be that many people that are going to be tuning into WNBA games as much as they're going to be tuning into NBA games. And that's just depending on who's being played. Like, Caitlin Clark, maybe she can pull in a lot more viewers than an NBA game, but that's just Caitlin Clark. Like, you need to have, if you're going to have these postseasons, you have to have them at some time in the summer, maybe like in August. I understand that the Olympics sort of interfered with that, so maybe that has something to do with the scheduling. But again, these games can happen when these games can totally happen. It's just they have to happen at a time when the NBA they have to happen at a time when football isn't happening. That's really the big concern here. Now, onto the games themselves. The Liberty ended up winning in game 1, ended up winning 87-77, and the Liberty have a lot of pieces on their team. Way more pieces than the Aces have, where, similar to the point that I just brought up before, they only have one or two players that can legitimately provide on the offense, being Aja Wilson and Kelsey Plum. And those two players, yes, they did play great, but they did not play nearly as efficient enough to be a close competition against the Liberty, who have several pieces to play well. Brenna Stewart ended up scoring 34 points in this game. She ended up going off. Sabrina Ionescu also ended up going off with 21 points in this game. Brenna Stewart, 12 for 19 from the field as well. And they did have, it was really those two players that were providing a lot, but the bench and everybody on the bench ended up scoring, and everybody that ended up coming into the game ended up scoring for the Liberty. However, on the Aces side, there were several players in the rotation that ultimately ended up not scoring, which ended up being the detriment of the team. And either that or they weren't scoring nearly as much as the rest of the bench, because the bench points were rather similar. It was really just the game of Brenna Stewart. Brenna Stewart really won the Liberty this game for them. And right now they hold the series lead at 1-0. Again, this is a best of 5, so they have to win 3 games in order to advance into the next round and go into the finals. This is also a finals rematch, it should be noted. Now, the Connecticut Sun ended up beating the Minnesota Lynx by 3 points, so it was a nail-biter of a game, and this was the first upset win throughout the entirety of the postseason. This was the first upset win throughout the entirety of the WNBA postseason. And again, winning 73-70 means that the game was rather close. So the Lynx could easily bounce back in the next game and make the series shift into their favor. And it should be some of the notable players for the team from the Sun. Marina Mabry ended up scoring 20 points. And Alyssa Thomas ended up scoring 17 points and ended up recording 10 rebounds, as well. DeJounte Carrington ended up scoring 13 points, ended up getting 9 rebounds, also 2 steals as well. And they got, it was a pretty even matchup between these two teams, and it really came down to the wire. And I'm just gonna go ahead and look at the play-by-play just to see how the game ended. And Alyssa Thomas ended up making a 2-point jump shot after Minnesota ended up making the game within 1, and eventually that sealed the win. So the score was, with around 50 seconds left in the quarter, the score was 71-68 after Alyssa Thomas ended up making a 2-point layup. Then afterwards, Nafisa Collier ended up making a 2-point layup as well, and the score was within 71-70. And it's around this point in the game where the best players and the best, teams and the clutch time gene really shows up. And Alyssa Thomas ended up answering the call yet again and made a 2-point jump shot with the help of Veronica Burton on the assist to make the score 73-70 to close out the game, as Nafisa Collier ended up missing a 3-point turnaround fadeaway jump shot as the clock expired. And that's how the game ended. So these games are still going to be, obviously, they follow the same format as the NBA, so it goes, the higher seed ends up getting 2 home games, and then the lower seed gets their 2 home games, and then if necessary, the higher seed would end up playing in Game 5 in their home court. So that's that's all that I have to say about the WNBA playoffs and the WNBA postseason. The next games are going to happen tomorrow, 7:30, 9:30, respectively. Again, these are much better times to actually work with because this is around a time where there is no football going on, which is what they need to do. And this is, this is sort of how it goes. So, again, this is all that I really have to say about the WNBA game. So now we will go ahead and go into the 4th segment where I talk about college basketball. Whoa, too much into college football right now this season. And we're going to go ahead and look at the March Madness tournament and where the games are going to be held, when these games are going to be held, and so that way you guys can go ahead and plan out your trips. Maybe I might pop out to some of these games. We don't know yet, but we'll be right back after this short break to talk about the March Madness game. So be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the 4th segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this 4th segment, we are going to be talking about the NCAA tournament and when these games are going to be going on. And Amir Lewis in the chat, are you stupid or just don't know anything about the Olympics? And let me see what else he has to say. And its impact on sports played during the summer. You 15, your podcasters need to get out, and then whatever. Okay, he's just being a hater. It's whatever. And I literally just mentioned the Olympics impacting the WNBA and this postseason and how it impacts, because a lot of the WNBA players, they have to go to the Olympics in order to win the gold medals. So I understand the impact of the Olympics and just how it affects sports. Thank you very much. And really, that still doesn't change the fact that these games should not happen on a Sunday. They're coming off of their best season. You're telling me that you can't have these games start earlier in the day on a Monday, break them up into a Tuesday, break them up into a Wednesday, break them up early into Thursday, as well as break them up early into Friday. Whoever planned the schedule, in my opinion, just didn't do a really good job. And you can be a hater all you want, but that's my opinion, and you're going to have to sit here and take it. Either that, or you can just click on another video, sir. Thank you very much. Please come again. But aside from that, let's actually focus on NCAA and college basketball, because that's really what I wanted to talk about until, hater alert, hater alert, hater alert, ended up getting into the comments. But aside from that, we're about 6 weeks into the beginning of the 2024 and the 2025 college basketball season. And arguably the most popular time of year for basketball is March. Everybody loves to tune into college basketball during March. It's a super fun experience, and a lot of people from all over the place, they love to go and but actually go and spectate a lot of these games, because these games, they're held in, obviously, these NCAA tournaments, they aren't held in, a team's home stadium. They're held in other stadiums, so that way other people can go ahead and experience the madness that it is of March. And the cities for the first and the second round have already been announced, and they're going to be taking place in Lexington, Kentucky, Providence, Rhode Island, Seattle, Wichita, forgive me for messing up that name, Kansas, Cleveland, Denver, Milwaukee, Raleigh, and North Carolina. So those are going to be where the first and second rounds of the NCAA tournament are going to be taking place. And the regional semifinals, so the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, will be taking place in Newark, New Jersey. Ooh. That's for the Eastern teams. And then Atlanta for the Southern teams, Indianapolis for the Midwestern teams, and San Francisco for the Western teams. And I'm actually very, very intrigued on the Newark, New Jersey, because if you guys know anything about me, I'm from Jersey. I come from Jersey. You know, being a Giants fan, obviously it means that I'd have to be somewhere located in Jersey. That's really, really close to home. That would really, really be a good time to watch a March Madness game. Maybe I'll go to that. Maybe I'll see exactly how that fits with my schedule and see if I can actually attend these March Madness games. But that would be very, very fun. I'm definitely going to consider that. So I'm just reading the chat. Good Monday. The NBA is going to expand to more franchises soon, so the Sonics 100% must return to the city of Seattle and Vegas. That would be good. What other cities would you pick for the NBA to expand? So I actually don't really like the idea of the NBA expanding into Vegas, and I didn't really like this idea off of the incident involving Henry Ruggs. If you guys know anything about football, then you know that Henry Ruggs was driving ridiculous speeds and ultimately ended up causing an accident. And he was a young player, and drafting young players into the city of Las Vegas and to play in the city of Las Vegas, I don't really think that's the best idea. So I would much rather not have a team expand over there. And Seattle is definitely going to be, I have no doubt in my mind that Seattle is going to be a team that's returning. And the Thunder have also, if you've watched my podcast, the Thunder have also said that that the Seattle Supersonics, and they're willing to give Seattle their history back, as well as give them the history back. So you know how Oklahoma City, they turned into, from Seattle they turned into the Oklahoma City Thunder after they relocated. They still have the history of the Seattle Supersonics. So they're going to give that team its history back if the NBA grants them its expansion team. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's what ends up happening, and that's like a hint that Seattle is going to try to be one of the teams that ends up expanding. And to be fair, other cities, I mean, I know Vancouver, they did have the Grizzlies over in Vancouver at one point, so Vancouver could be a place that they're thinking of expanding. I don't know how I would fare about having a team expand outside of the United States, but that is definitely going to be something to think about. Definitely not in California. There's already 4 teams there in California, so I wouldn't really say moving to California is a good idea. And it's really tough to decide on where exactly they would build an expanded team. Obviously, Vegas would be a prime option, but again, I'm just not a big fan of the idea of having rookies over in Vegas. Again, that is just me. And Drew Powell Gasol in the chat, rip Dikembe Mutombo. Yes, I did talk about that before earlier in the segment. And let me just go ahead and continue on with the rest of this document. So Selection Sunday, the announcement of the 68-team bracket is going to proceed after all the games on Sunday, March 16th. The complete dates and venue information for the 2025 Division I men's NCAA tournament are going to be listed very soon. So the Selection Sunday is going to happen March 16th, and the first 4 games are going to go on from March 18th all the way to March 19th. The first round is going to be March 20th, and as well as March 21st, March 22nd, and so on and so forth. I'm sure all of you guys completely understand exactly how March Madness works. But the venues, I'm really interested in like these games and like where they're taking place. I really, really hope to be able to go to the Sweet 16 or at least the Elite 8 in Newark, in New Jersey. That would be a very fun experience. And if I do go there, I'll probably go ahead and post a couple of shorts just updating you guys on the whole situation and things like that. And thank you for correcting me about all of these players. Again, this is like, let's face it, this is the first time that any of us have been watching the WNBA. If you say that you were watching the WNBA before Caitlin Clark got into the league, you are lying to yourself. Let's be for real. And that's one. And for two, I will say that yes, I tend to mispronounce a lot of people's names. Like that's just a really bad thing for me. Like that's just a bad thing that I have going on. Like I mispronounce. I've honestly, like at first, when I was first introduced to Giannis Antetokounmpo, I struggled trying to figure out how to pronounce his name for the longest time. And I mean, the reality is, like, again, pronouncing names has never been my strength. Again, English isn't really, it sounds like English was my first language, but it really wasn't. So again, here we go in the chat. Hater alert, hater alert, hater alert. It's that simple. Again, if you really got a problem, you can always click on another video, my guy. You really don't got to waste your time here, but it's whatever. So aside from that, that is all that we have for the fourth segment. And so after this fourth segment, we're going to talk about, honestly, one of the funniest betting odds that I found out. Jimmy Butler, and this is going to sound crazy, but Jimmy Butler's hairstyle has betting odds. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next segment right after this short break. And we are back with the fifth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And yes, this is actually a conversation going on. So in this segment, we are going to be talking about Jimmy Butler's hairstyle on Media Day because it is a very, it's become like a meme sort of like in the NBA and it's so much of a meme that now there's like actual legitimate betting odds for like what hairstyle is Jimmy Butler going to rock and what Jimmy Butler is going to have on Media Day. Because the last few years on Media Day, Jimmy Butler has had some of the most interesting, for lack of a better term, hairstyles. And I'm sure Manzano, if he's still in the chat, he knows exactly what I'm talking about these hairstyles and about how egregious they are. So over here you can see the hairstyle that he ended up going with. It's supposed to be emo because around this time it was rumored that Damian Lillard was going to end up getting traded to the Miami Heat. But then, unfortunately, well, if you are a Miami Heat fan, unfortunately he ended up getting dealt with the Milwaukee Bucks. And in response to that, Jimmy Butler was like, I'm emo now. And it's really funny, but like the fact that there are betting odds on this and like which hairstyle he's gonna get is actually even funnier in my opinion. And just acknowledging some people in the chat, Jupal Gasol, haters are going to hate. Yes, of course they are. They're everywhere. It happens, but I'm used to it. You know, let them hate even more by doing your thing. Of course, it's really just It's really just it. And look at him, like, oh, still in the chat, honestly. Like, you can click off the video, buddy. It really doesn't matter. But aside from that, Jimmy Butler and his hairstyles, they've been very ridiculous. So I'm actually kind of curious, since we do have a lot of people in the chat, what hairstyle do you guys think Jimmy Butler is going to have coming into Media Day? Do you think he's going to actually have his, the hair that he's going to always have during the regular season? Because after Media Day, he always ends up changing his hair back to normal and back to going into braids or something like that. Like, he's never set foot on the court looking like this, which it's funny. It's absolutely hilarious in my opinion. But some of the betting odds for his, or some of the options for his hair. Do you guys think he's going to go bald? Do you guys think he's going to come in with dyed hair? Do you guys think he's going to come in with an afro? Do you think he's going to come in with a mohawk, buzz cut, braids, a man bun? What do you guys think he's going to come out with? Because quite honestly, I don't know if this is, and another question that I have, do you guys think that this sort of makes him a bit of a diva? Because that is sort of a reputation that he's had, like, and that's sort of the vibe that I'm getting based on how he acts. Like, I mean, he does this obviously, like, well, not obviously, but I feel like he does a lot of this for attention from the media. I feel like that's what he does. And the reason why I feel like he does a lot of these things for the media is just based off of his personality off of the court. I mean, on his time with the Timberwolves, there were reports that he wanted to get traded, and he was vividly showing that he wanted to get traded, and he was doing the absolute most to get traded. And on top of that, his time with Miami, just recently actually with the postseason, he mentioned how if he was healthy during the postseason, the Boston Celtics would have lost the series. And from where I'm standing, it's like, you can't do that. Like, you really can't say that, especially after the Miami Heat ended up getting gentlemen swept by the Boston Celtics. That's just not something that you say. And Pat Riley did have a lot of things to say about that. And, I mean, he said that he should keep his mouth shut since he wasn't playing on the court. And I feel like, a lot of these things that Jimmy Butler tends to do is done for the attention of the media. Again, he doesn't really care, and all power to him for not really caring what other people say about him. But again, it's something rather interesting to think about, and the fact that people are really placing betting odds on his hairstyle, I think is funny. There's also one that there was one comment that I saw that somebody said that he was going to come in looking like Mickey Mouse with some pigtails going on the side, which I thought was hilarious, which I did see him. I think I saw him wear that once on the court during a game. I could be wrong. I don't really pay attention that much to Miami Heat games. Again, I follow a lot more of the teams that are closer in my region, as well as, the Lakers and LeBron. But it's like, how could you not follow the Lakers and LeBron? And most of the time, the Heat games, they aren't really on the TV channel, so I don't really have access to watch a majority of them. But I do remember seeing Jimmy Butler with those pigtails. So it is a possibility. Again, this is probably going to be Jimmy Butler's last year with the Miami Heat. So any of you Miami Heat fans, I mean, good luck. I have no idea whether or not he's going to sign an extension with them, what's going to happen during the season. Because, I mean, if, God forbid, like the Miami Heat, if a rumor springs about that Jimmy Butler wants to get traded, then maybe, or like that the Miami Heat want to trade Jimmy Butler, then maybe out of nowhere, he'll just start acting like how he did on Minnesota. That's totally a possibility. I mean, I have no idea with Jimmy Butler. He's a wild card at times, and you put up with that wild card because at the end of the day, he does end up making the finals sometimes. Like, I mean, every other year he does make the Eastern Conference Finals, and they do end up facing off against the Celtics a lot of the times. They faced off against the Celtics numerous times in the postseason, but that's basically all that I have to talk about in this final segment. Again, I just thought it was very funny. Just the abundance of hairstyles that he has on Media Day, and how it's like every single time he comes in with a different look on Media Day, and now people are actually placing bets on that. I thought that was very hilarious. But aside from that, that's all that I have for this segment, so that's the end of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates, especially now since the NBA season is going to be happening. Since the NBA is going to be happening on October 4th. So that's really all that I have to that's really all that I have to say for today. And Steven Torres in the chat is right now he's like having a little chat with Amir, who was the hater in the chat. Just calm down. This is a friendly space. This is supposed to be a friendly space. This isn't like there's not supposed to be much animosity. I just want to talk basketball. Like, that's really all that I want to talk about on this podcast, guys. Come on now. We don't need to. I mean, thank you, Steven, for representing Jersey, standing up for all them people in Jersey. I love that. We love to see that. And again, that's all that I really have to say on this show. Again, be sure to tune in especially for the rest of the season, since the games are going to be starting. I'm definitely going to watch all of the games on opening night, since they are going to be happening on Friday, and it's a time that I can actually work with. And before I begin, I do like to remind everybody, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, especially today. Today was amazing. Today was awesome. So, again, just if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then I highly recommend using Super Chat. Just hit the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. If Super Chat's not really your thing, then that's totally fine. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That's gsmcpodcast.net, and you could send in your comments and or donations that way. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys, even though it was pretty interactive today as of right now. So that's all that I really have to say today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.